To get all the latest on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, Melinda St. Louis is on the show. Melinda is the Director of International Campaigns at Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. I first asked her if she's concerned that the TPP will have a negative effect on certain industries, and if so, which ones? Here's what she had to say.
As you mentioned, the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, has been negotiated behind closed doors for more than 6 years. And there is a lot that we still don't know. We are very concerned. There are certain industries that there will be winners and losers, perhaps, but the reality is this is not about trade predominantly. There are 30 chapters. Only 6 of them have really anything to do with tariffs and the taxes on goods that cross borders, what we think of as trade. The rest have to do with a whole host of issues that affect our daily lives. So you can talk about industries, but you can also talk about how it impacts the average person in the United States. And we're very concerned about what the impacts will be for our food safety, for example, for the price of medicines, things that have actually a chapter just leaked today by WikiLeaks of the intellectual property, the final text, so we actually know what is in there. And we've seen how the pharmaceutical companies really push to be able to increase their monopolies at the expense of generic medicines, which actually is often the expense of lives when people can't afford those medicines. So that's just one example. There's also serious concerns around what the impacts will be for our ability to regulate Wall Street and to avoid financial crises in the future, and also concerns around the impact on internet freedom. So it really affects our entire lives.
It has vast
implications. And it has vast implications beyond the specific trade issues.
Well, you mentioned pharmaceutical companies benefiting here. What other kinds of companies really stand to gain from a trade pact like this?
Well, the pharmaceutical companies, Wall Street firms, we know that they were really seeking to put rules in there that would limit government's ability to regulate certain activities. That they were definitely the big winners. In the United States, there was a trade advisory system where there were corporate advisors, more than 500 of them, that had access to the texts, who were helping to shape what the rules were while the public was locked out. Now, almost 9 in 10 of these advisors were explicitly representatives of multinational corporations and industry associations, but not the public. And so that's why you see rules that will benefit pharmaceutical companies. They'll benefit Hollywood, big content that are really that want to charge more.
That's what I was going to ask you. I mean, have these companies specifically been working to draft this legislation and also lobby it?
Well, they have been. As I mentioned, I mean, they almost have had a seat at the table. I mean, obviously, it was our government representatives who were negotiating, but they were cleared advisors. They had a password-protected website where they could see what was being negotiated. They could influence it along the way. And at this very same time that the press, that the public, that even our elected representatives didn't have that same access. And so therefore, it shouldn't be a surprise to people who's going to benefit from this.
Right.
Is it going to be the workers and consumers?
If they have a seat at the table, it's obvious they're going to be looking out for their best interests. When a lot of people think about the jobs issue here, because that's what it seems to be hung up on a little bit, is it going to create jobs or not? They think back to that famous saying, kind of made popular by Ross Perot, that giant sucking sound. And, we thought it really fitting to play. So we have a clip of it. We want to play it really quickly.
To those of you in the audience who are business people, pretty simple. If you're paying $12, $13, $14 an hour for factory workers, and you can move your factory south of the border, pay $1 an hour for labor, hire a young 25, that's assuming you've been in business for a long time, you've got a mature workforce. Pay $1 an hour for your labor, have no health care, that's the most expensive single element in making a car, have no environmental controls, no pollution controls, and no retirement, and you don't care about anything but making money, there will be a giant sucking sound going south.
And a lot of people remember that particular saying. The Obama administration has long argued that this is going to create hundreds of thousands of jobs. I think they put the number at 600. So it really begs the question, how are both sides really doing the math here? One side says hundreds of thousands of jobs. The other side says No, that's not going to happen. So what's the discrepancy there?
Well, we've seen the cooking of the books for a long time in terms of the administration putting out numbers about growth and about jobs. You have to look at the record of these agreements. So Ross Perot was talking about the North America Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, and we now see the data from NAFTA. They also were they were projecting huge numbers of jobs that would be created. In the first 10 years of NAFTA, there were nearly 1 million jobs that were lost, and we can, using the same calculations that the administration has used to project gains, we've seen, for example, in the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement that just finished 3 years, that actually the same calculation would show 80,000 jobs being lost. And so what serious economists at this point do not make job projections around these trade agreements. They say that it will change the composition of employment.
It's impossible to predict.
It's impossible to predict, but it will definitely change the composition of employment. In the period of these free trade agreements, we've seen 1 in 4 manufacturing jobs in the United States offshored. That is 5 million jobs. That has led to an overall depression on wages. So it's not just the people who lost their manufacturing job, but it was those service sector jobs that perhaps they got later that didn't have benefits, that had lower wages. And so we've seen that the middle class in the United States, under this regime of so-called free trade, but very controlled trade that's benefiting large corporations, has meant that the middle class hasn't really gotten a raise, while there has been increased productivity in the United States. But he mentioned offshoring to south of the border for where it's $1 an hour wages. In Vietnam, which is a country that's part of the TPP, it's 60 cents an hour now, however many years later. And forced labor, child labor, the inability to form an independent union. And so this type of massive trade agreement and these rules that incentivize job offshoring, that pit workers against each other in countries and basically create this global race to the bottom. And who benefits? Perhaps the bottom lines of some of these large corporations that offshore, but certainly not American workers.
Well, we know, speaking of workers, we know American unions in particular do not like the TPP, and they've been rallying against it for quite some time now. I remember attending some of those rallies. But what about workers in the other countries? Do they stand to gain anything here?
Well, that's the unfortunate thing that we've seen from these trade deals, that it's not really workers from Mexico benefiting and workers from the United States losing. What we saw is that perhaps there were some jobs created in Mexico. They were very precarious employment, without benefits, without good working conditions. Those jobs, many of them also left Mexico to lower wage jurisdictions later. So you don't really see real benefits for workers.